Right into me.
Talking to the side of the mic. I know. I'm just joking.
Am I doing it?
I'm just joking.
Don't you know about the bird? Hey, everybody knows that the bird is a bird. Bird's a word.
Can we just open the
So my mic's obviously, if you talk at the top,
jamming it out?
it's no different.
Bird is can I just hit record?
I have no preference
It is
as long as you can hear yourself and you hear yourself kind of fading right into it.
Yeah.
Family Guy.
All right.
I mean, it's
That
and the real sign. Before the Family Guy.
Welcome everybody to Bobby Talks, ... Those dots are there to tell you that there's always more to the story. Today's story, well, it's trying to dissect and get to the bottom of what is truth. Does it exist? Does it not? Is it our reality? Is it perception? We will get there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here today, Season 2, Episode 2, with Mike Neal, professor over at Adrian College and the owner of Corked Media. How you doing, man?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, Robert. Really, I brought Bobby. I guess we're going to be here. I love it. Yeah.
It's so funny. People call me Bobby on the show, but then like when they see me in real life, like, how you doing, Rob? I'm like, I'm doing all right.
I mean, the emails come up, Rob, and stuff, so I got to save it in my phone as Bobby. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, just don't call me Bob.
Okay.
That feels like I've entered in a whole new age bracket.
Sure. Yeah, that's another generation up there, right?
Like I said, I'm sitting here with Mike Neal, professor over at Adrian College. He is in the Communications, Arts, and Sciences department. How long have you been there?
I've been at Adrian College since 2008, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I started as a student. Then I spent some time right after graduation in the Public Relations department. Then I started ACTV, Adrian College Television, just the live streaming of
you
sports
did that?
services. Yeah, I started that in 2014.
So you have a footprint there now.
I'd like to think so, to some degree. Yeah, been there so long. I hope so. So the production house. At the same time, I started to do some adjuncting while I was working through graduate school on the comm department, and fortunately, the stars kind of aligned as I was beginning to work on my doctorate. That a position opened up and said, all right, I think I've had enough of the school. Why don't I just start teaching now?
Well, we go to school to get a job, and you were offered a job, especially straight out. Most times, professors, you're looking for that type of experience that they can bring to the real life experience, field experience. Mm-hmm. And in your case, you had it, right? And then they knew that because you were already a product of them. So yeah, that's a perfect fit, man.
Yeah, I think it helped that I just constantly was badgering them a little bit with asking to do different video projects on campus, and eventually I was like, why don't we just let them pass that along with the students?
Sure.
Go hang out in Rush Hall. Yeah.
So tell me about. You started there. Were you just a part-time professor then, kind of working in, trying to do some different projects? When does Cork Media come about? And talk to us a little bit about this.
I think the two kind of collided a little bit. So my thesis for my master's degree was to create a feature-length documentary film on character Bud Fowler, who spent some time in Adrian.
Okay.
And after finishing that film, which was my first feature-length effort, I really started to dive into that industry a little bit more and notice some of the opportunities available to me. And at the same time, Adrian College was looking to kind of pivot into some more modern digital media production, which was something that I was beginning to have more and more experience with from the filmmaking and then the production efforts with ACTV and my company, which does a lot of short promotional marketing videos for nonprofits and small businesses. So I had the experience they were looking for. I was already on campus, and like I said, the stars just aligned.
So Cork Media, then you go about this Bud Fowler, which I am not familiar with him.
Okay.
But why does Mike Neal at that time? What year did Page Fence Giants come out? Or Bud Fowler and the Page Fence Giants.
Bud Fowler and the Page Fence Giants released in 2016.
Okay, so really? So not that long ago, about 5 years. So you've done 2 feature-length films in 5 years, and you're working on your third one right now.
Correct.
Okay, go to corkmedia.com. Check this out. Where can they find your work? Is it on there right now, and they can watch it? They got to purchase it?
Access. Bud Fowler and the Page Fence Giants is on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
If you've got a Prime membership, it's free. I think it's like 99 cents to rent it. Otherwise, Without Wax, we had a very interesting copyright dilemma, so it is on YouTube. But obviously you can access it for free there.
Always love YouTube. They partner with me here, so
great. I don't want to call it a backup plan, but it's always there for us. We'll say that.
So why you want to tell this story about Bud Fowler? Like, what draws a I don't know how old you are. I'm assuming we're similar
31.
age. 31? Yeah. Okay, so I'm 34. What draws a 26-year-old kid to want to tell a story about Bud Fowler?
Good question. I'm passionate about baseball first and foremost. Bud Fowler.
Tigers fan?
Not so much a Toronto Blue Jays fan. Yeah, but as long as I'm in Michigan, all of the Michigan teams are right there underneath my Toronto
Makes
squad.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I love seeing the Tigers win.
Are you Toronto native?
I am a Canadian native,
Okay.
but London, Ontario, about an hour and a half southwest of Toronto.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So 2016, I'm in graduate school. I knew I wanted to do more with video production. The Cork Media was already operating, as mentioned, as a marketing video production company at the time, but I didn't love working for others, as I think a lot do. I wanted to really follow my own creative passion. And when I heard the story of Bud Fowler when visiting actually before visiting, I'm just reading the Adrian College Wikipedia page, or the Adrian, Michigan Wikipedia page, they mention the Page Fence Giants, which was a baseball team, a barnstorming African-American baseball team in the late 19th century, traveled around the country and dominated baseball at the time. Obviously, baseball was still segregated then, so these players didn't have an opportunity to play at the highest level, but they were getting exhibitions against teams like the Cincinnati Reds and other kind of area league all-stars.
So they were playing against higher level competition.
And dominating.
Yeah,
and it all started with Bud Fowler, who was, he's credited now as the first professional African-American baseball player.
According to the MLB, that really?
Yes, he's going to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame as such. Most obviously look to Jackie Robinson as we look at kind of the modern construction of baseball. But Bud Fowler was able to find himself onto integrated teams around the turn of the 19th century.
Talent talks, man.
Absolutely. And yeah, he spent time in the Page Fence Giants, is an Adrian-based team sponsored by the Page Fence Company, which was one of the biggest fence companies in the world at the time. Another while, I learned a lot about early Adrian history, and we've got a lot of it here.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's the stuff that this show, we were just talking off air about what am I trying to do with this show. And, one of the things we talked about was learning about or presenting things about the local area to the outside world and about what we're all about. And that I love learning things like that. I think it's fascinating. So
yeah, the city's really have embraced him in recent years too. So I mentioned after the Wikipedia page, I made my way to the Historical Society.
He's still alive? No. Okay. I was going to say, this is going back, man.
Yeah, I think he'd be a record breaker at that point. Yeah, so he was playing around in the 1890s.
Oh, the 1890s. Okay,
he
gotcha.
Passed, I think it was around 1915 at age. He didn't live very long past his playing career, actually. Some others associated with him lived right into the 60s and 70s. There's like Grant Home Run Johnson, a few other names that were very impactful for the game that he crossed paths with. But Bud Fowler, embraced by the local historical society, they've got a nice little section carved off for him.
That's cool.
Yeah, actually down here on, not Main, because that would be Winter. The other parallel to Main, they've got the glass.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's who that is then. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, a nice little, I don't know what we would
Walked
call
by
that.
it 1,000 times. Just a little memento.
Display.
Or
a little glass display that tells a little bit about his career. And
cool.
Yeah, he's a really exciting character. So I recommend everyone check him out.
So I'm not sure you answered my question. Maybe you did. I was just trying to figure out why you choose that versus. So is it documentary style? Is it you just saw that story as an opportunity to kind of dive into documentary work, or do you want to get to fiction pieces as well? What are you looking at?
I think that's a great way to describe it. I've always been a big fan of documentary filmmakers, and I just wanted that, as we kind of talked about with the podcast, you want to have that idea that you can latch on to, because it's taxing to work on over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years. And when I started to learn more about Bud Fowler, it was just kind of like, that's it. That's the story I want to tell. I'd pitch it to kind of like we're doing now, just talking about him.
Yeah.
Very few people knew about him, but as soon as I kind of tell them more about it,
there's a story there to tell.
That's something. Why don't we know more about that? So,
makes sense.
Yeah, I got to interview Pete Rose, Fergie Jenkins, go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. I went to 14 different Major League Baseball parks. It was really a dream to make this movie. Even if no video came of it, I got some great memories from working through it.
That's the whole point of this for me, is that I'm trying to build a community, right? And that, like I told you off air, I will do this for the rest of my life, right? If it blows or doesn't. And the interesting thing is that I'm taking away memories from this show, and to me they're little projects, they're little documentary pieces. But I think it's fascinating. Yeah, look, some of the footage I'm seeing is unreal here. So
it was cool. Like downtown New York. Hey, can I interview for you?
Yeah.
And I said it was my first film at 25, 26 years old. It was intimidating, but very exciting to be in downtown New York. I did most of the film with one friend, but I was in a lot of these places, a lot of these states, all alone.
Guerrilla filmmaking, man. That's the way to do it,
Boots
buddy.
on the ground, dude. That's it.
Just dive in.
Get it done.
Well, listen, so we're here now, and I brought you on for some specific reasons.
Yep.
And I'm kind of glad we kind of got to this documentary area because I want to talk about a couple other documentaries. I'm not sure if you've seen them, or not necessarily, we don't have to talk about the documentaries themselves, but just the idea of what they are talking about.
Sure.
A couple is the one that was on Netflix mid-summer last year, The Social Dilemma.
Of course, yeah.
Seen
Tristan Thompson, great piece.
It was it was a great piece. And then there's another one that was on HBO Max recently. I don't know if you've seen this.
Cue Into the Storm?
I have not seen that one.
I was hoping that's where you're going with
Oh
it.
man, I feel like I just missed an opportunity
it's
there.
so good, but sorry to cut you off.
Well, the one it's called After Truth in the era of disinformation. Have you seen that
I
one?
didn't catch that one.
Okay, so
that's
basically-
on my watch list.
Basically, they just kind of talk about this idea of where are we as a society when it comes to truth. When it is, and I wrote down something here that they start that documentary out with is that there's no such thing as truth, only the perception. And the other thing is that the idea of letting it all come out and let the people decide. So let's start specifically here with where are you at right now in 2021 with information and how it's being handled by us, the people, and also by the the media conglomerates and the big social media conglomerates as well. Like, where are you at with information in this country right now? It's a loaded question.
It's a big question for sure. I'll try not to totally just steal and retread ideas from The Social Dilemma. As
Sure.
It's a film I actually show in my communication theory class. And
Oh, you do? I showed it to my leadership class in high school.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's just a great, and it's shockingly they weren't as aware of it. I think our generation
Yeah.
was more into kind of sorting out what exactly we're experiencing with
Sure.
this kind of change of the dominance of technology, whereas the Gen Zs had been kind of birthed into it, and
they were literally born as the technology existed.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have that. We knew a world before it.
right. You're the same boat as me. Probably didn't get your first cell phone until your teens,
Yes,
right?
right.
Our first cell phone was a brick, right? That didn't do very much. I remember playing Snake on it and thought it was the coolest thing ever. That I had a game on.
That
my
game
phone.
was cool. I would play that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are in a very pivotal moment right now in our kind of consumption of information. So from a kind of user standpoint, we need to start to recognize how we're using this technology, being the social media, the new online publications, and really how technology is driving all of the information that we're consuming today, or at least most of us are consuming today.
So more of a conscious awareness from the user themselves.
Yeah.
That is definitely not taking place right now.
I said I wouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it right now. Is one of the great kind of metaphors from the Social Dilemmas when Tristan Thompson speaks about every time there's a new invention, every time we're introduced to a new technology, it's never been demanding of us the way that the new technology is within our kind of online internet space. So the analogy they use is the bicycle. So when you buy a bicycle, it's there, it's waiting for you to go ride it. It doesn't come up to your bed.
It's not insecure.
Say it's time to ride your bike again. Yeah, it's there when you need it. So it would be great, and I think that is kind of exemplary of the earlier days of the internet, the kind of curiosity that we had with our relationship to it. Whereas now the internet has been fed as kind of a transition. We talk about Web 2.0 versus 3.0.
Right.
2.0 is the time when we fed it.
Right.
But now
it's feeding
coming
us.
back
It's
for
insecure,
us.
right? That is what and I think it's Tristan Harris, right?
I keep saying Thompson.
Thompson.
No, I think that's
of the
basketball
Cleveland.
player.
Yeah, you're thinking of the old Cleveland player.
He's Canadian, so that's why it's coming to mind. Thank you.
Tristan Harris. So yes. The Social Dilemma went on and talked about, and I thought they painted a really good picture about like the insecurities and just how now these phones are pinging us, right, to get notified or to get our attention because we haven't used it in such a maybe it's been 30 minutes, so they've got to ping us with something to get our attention back onto it. Mm-hmm. That is that Web 3.0 that you're discussing here, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So now so again, back to the kind of Web 2.0, we look at this as kind of around a 2013-14 generational change where we went from again the time that we fed it to a time that we fed it so much that now the internet has learned enough to provide us this individualized experience.
Yes.
as you're probably aware, your Facebook feed, not just because of the friends that you have that are different than mine, looks very different than my Facebook feed.
It does.
You're
And what
being
I'm seeing
advertised
versus what you're seeing, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And this boils down to what we call uses and gratification theory.
Okay.
So we, as users, gravitate towards what we like.
Right.
Right? It makes us feel good about things, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to constantly click on the stories that kind of reaffirm my personal biases.
And I'm going to watch a video that lasts, and I'll stay on it longer.
Yeah, and these sites are learning, okay, Michael Neal likes this kind of stuff. Don't
Right.
show him the other stuff that's going to get him to close the app that might actually educate him a little bit.
Right.
And then we find ourselves in a place talking about what is truth when you're only getting half of the story.
So then, speaking about the truth then, if you're only getting half the story and you're only getting the affirmation versus the information, how can we as a society then, maybe I should phrase it this way, where should we as a society get our truth from?
I don't think about this for a second. I don't think there's ever going to be a revolt against technology. I think it's so ingrained in our kind of progression forward as a society that we're going to continue to utilize it. It's going to continue to be a big part of our lives and a bigger part of our lives as we move forward. Moore's law says every 18 months the capability of computers doubles. So it's kind of a scary thought right
Very
there.
scary,
Right?
yep.
So I think the best kind of outcome right now, and I hate to bring government and authority into this, is to have kind of a better expectations for the providers, for them to act more ethically with kind of how they generate these advertising dollars. And that's asking a lot of them because they don't want to take away from their capitalist build.
Yeah, and that's kind of what this After Truth documentary was talking about is, that there was a lot of time spent on there with Mark Zuckerberg when he was being questioned by the 44 senators in 2018 about what is Facebook's and social, because he's kind of was the face of the social media conglomerates, right?
Sure, yeah.
What is Facebook's responsibility to the user when it comes to information? And the question becomes, if I, Robert Gifford, want to get on Bobby Talks and sell propaganda of misinformation and disinformation to people maliciously, but I'm not causing any physical harm myself, doesn't the First Amendment and don't I have the right to do that? The answer is yes, I do. However, the First Amendment only backs up government oppression, right, of freedom of speech. So then when they're talking about the social media conglomerates, they're saying that Mark Zuckerberg absolutely can shut that down, shut Robert Gifford from having a platform to deliver this propaganda. What Mark Zuckerberg is saying is that that's a slippery slope in its own self, because if I start picking and choosing what I think is
becomes the arbiter of truth to some
the
degree.
arbiter of truth now becomes Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and what they believe to be truth.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous game to play.
I think some would say we've already started playing that game to a certain degree.
Because we've seen the other side of it. We've seen the wild, wild west where we as a people can't police ourselves.
Sure.
So where are we at with that? So the question becomes, does Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, he has a point. Should it be should the companies like Twitter and all them fact check it and just leave it at that? We fact check this is clearly not true, but we're going to leave it up. Or should they go as far as to completely take it off there so that we don't have this disinformation going around? Because they also said in that Social Dilemma that fake news spreads 6 times faster than real news. And isn't that something?
Yeah. Wild. Why? that part, I guess we know that certain fake news stories were more because they were kind of crafted to be attractive. But why do they? I don't want to get off the question there, but
I think it's
frustrating, right? That we can't be personally gratified with the truth.
But I think it's because we're motivated by emotions.
Sure.
So when somebody's selling me something and they sound like they're passionate about something, we automatically buy into the credibility of that person. I could say something right here, 100 miles per hour, change my cadence, make you think, that I know exactly what I'm talking about because I don't miss a beat, but all of it can be completely, just not true.
Yeah. I think there's a couple different directions to look at that. Kind of going back to the issue of Mark Zuckerberg and the control that we're potentially affording these social media platforms. And as we talked about, we've seen that this has started, particularly with Twitter. And we actually have a term for it now, deplatforming, where
Yep.
essentially you're scrubbed from the internet to some degree, as far as all of the big players will work together in removing you, because they are kind of webbed into each other to some degree. We've seen it with Alex Jones, probably most notably, but President Trump and former President Trump and several others, of course. So it becomes it's not democratic, obviously, that's the issue. So we look at this from the perspective of, should these companies be regulated to a similar degree that we do media? And when I'm talking about these companies, I'm talking about you and me.
Sure,
really,
yeah.
Because we're the kind of voices of those companies
Right.
on the ground level, anyways. And that is a very slippery slope, because do we want to deal with the same type of regulations that a WTOL or someone else that has to deal with just to have our voice heard?
Right.
There was a law in place for just a few years. It's called the 1949 Fairness Doctrine.
Okay.
And it said that anybody who's within the media wants to discuss any type of cultural issue, abortion, things along those lines, you must present equal time to both issues.
Interesting.
Very interesting, right? And when I ask my students about this in class, they say, that's a great idea.
At first, it sounds like a great idea.
Right, yes.
But depending on the topic you're covering, right?
Exactly. And do you want to be forced to say anything? Is that free speech?
Right.
Like, if this is your program, Bobby Talks, should you be forced to spend half of your time on the side of the issue that you're not on?
Sure.
It obviously, most of us would say no in a free country. So that law didn't persist, but it's something that type of law is something that people are beginning to look at again. We have the Advertising Substantiation Program in the United States, which requires all media to provide equal opportunity to advertising. So it's not equal opportunity to conversation.
Right.
But if you're going to offer $1 million commercial, you have to offer it as $1 million to all political parties.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Fun little fact there. So I don't know if that's equal, because the little parties don't necessarily have the $1 million to spend on the commercial, but the rate has to be equal.
It's fair in written form only.
Sure, fair to the establishment that we have.
Sure, yeah.
So that's kind of one side of it is, do we want to change the rules so that we can continue to kind of have our access to these platforms, but know that we have to work within a certain guideline. If you don't hit the guideline, you're pulled. Versus, kind of the big discussion right now is Section 230 is Mark Zuckerberg, is Facebook responsible for you?
Right.
And that's what they don't want to have happen, right?
They don't want that at all.
Right. So it's for some of our listeners, Section 230 says that if Bobby Talks, and I don't want to use this example.
Sure.
Let's use some random podcast is out there, and they're promoting, say, a terrorist attack, and they're pushing it out on Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. It's kind of an extreme example, but would Facebook be held responsible for that attack being pushed forward?
Now, that has been put into law now, where if you are promoting some type of terrorist attack, that is deemed a terrorism act.
Sure.
And then you can be trialed by that. But where does Mark Zuckerberg's responsibility hold up there?
How long did he let it kind of go on?
And does and what that After Truth documentary does is that they're saying that it's so big that they don't even know what's going on, and there's not a way of knowing how much it's going on until it's gone on. And that's kind of like an eye-opening thing. It's like you have this company, but you are not really in control of this company anymore.
No.
And should you be? Should it be regulated so much that you do? The problem is that it would hurt the capitalism side of it. Yeah. And then that's not American.
It happens so fast, but these companies have become too big to fail.
Right.
Right. And now we're working with them as opposed to them operating their own space.
Let me ask you this question, because we're coming up on about 6 minutes left of the first section here. Okay. This is the first segment. It flies, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
So the question becomes, if we as a society are watching the very fabric and fibers of our society just unfold, okay, are we silly to go down with the ship instead of trying to right the ship? Like continuing to play by the rules in which we laid out, because nobody could have foresaw these social media companies being what they are. Or should we try to straighten the ship here? So I guess essentially what I'm saying is that what side of the fence do you fall on specifically? As Mike Neal, do you believe we should hold these social media conglomerates and media more accountable, more of a regulation, or should we hold on to this freedom to spread misinformation and disinformation because that is who we are?
Right. And I thought a lot about this, and it's definitely not an easy question to answer. And I think I would prefer to allow the liberty to remain in the internet, allow it to remain a completely public space, and for the technology to maybe catch up to some of the issues that are kind of popping up right now as it's continuing to grow. That's obviously an optimistic stance to say that we're going to sort this out.
Right.
As we also talk about the speed and the rate in which it's growing, there's always going to be kind of bad actors that kind of find their way into this space. But are you familiar with deepfakes, the deepfake technology? Yeah, I mean, that's something that definitely scares me. And then if I just kind of point to that specifically and think of, if we're moving this quickly and we know that already exists, how long is it until it's kind of an everyday experience having to just distinguish between real and fake video?
Right.
I mean, that's something we're not trained to do as humans. It's something that we would, maybe evolutionary will catch up to this.
You're right. And it feels like it's a generational fix and a generation upon a generational fix. Like that's interesting you said that, because some of these lobbyists, they are on record saying that they know what they're doing is deep fake, it's lying, but it exists. So if our opponent is going to use it against us, we're going to use it against them.
Yeah.
And what I love about that documentary that I just watched here recently was that it talks about both sides. It talks about how the Democrats felt that the Republicans were using more of that stuff. And, you have the Russian hacking in its own right, but you have the Republicans that were using it in 2015 and 16. But then in 2018, the Democrats started using it down in this, I believe his name is Doug Jones versus Roy Moore down in the senator's seat down in Alabama.
Yeah.
And they flipped the script. They're like, well, we're going to play ball and we're going to, the Senate seat really matters, so we're going to go after it. And they did the same thing. So it's not a Republican Democrat. No party is better than the other. There's those that feel one might be less dirty than the others, but it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I thought they did a really good job of kind of showcasing that and showing both sides. But man, it is scary. You talk about scary to sit there and weaponize it, disinformation, and continue to put it into the public. I think where we fall on things is that I think it's a generation of educating your youth to say, this is what happened. This is what life was like before. This is what life was like, at that time. And now you're in this life. You have choices that you can make. You need to look at things with an eye open, because what you see anymore doesn't necessarily, seeing isn't believing anymore, right? Only believe half of what you see now.
Yeah. And I think one of the frustrating things in that space of the seeing is believing is you can read a story that's by a reputable writer and it feels as if it's good content, but you still know in the back of your mind that you need to kind of cross-reference that with something from potentially the other political ideological slant that we recognize all of our media outlets have kind of embraced so far today and are more and more kind of outwardly embracing this.
Sure.
So that can certainly be frustrating as far as we want to be able to rely on what is these established networks to just provide us news. That is the job of these media outlets, is to keep us informed as a populace, not manipulate us. So I think looking at intent, kind of as you're talking about with these kind of lobbyist groups that have clear intent with what they're doing, is an area where we might be able to put some regulation in place, where if you have clear malice intent with spreading certain information, there's probably ways that we can identify that.
Right.
Then maybe there's an opportunity for us to kind of nip it in the bud.
Let's do this, man. We're getting ready to hit a break. We're going to hit a break here real quick. I want to talk to you about the Capitol riots.
Okay.
Talk to you about whether or not information played a part in that.
Okay.
Whether or not influence from, people such as President Trump, QAnon, things of these nature, if they are held responsible. QAnon probably a little more because they were there on ground, right? But we'll talk more about those things and whether or not people should be prosecuted or not.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll see you on the other side. Bobby Talks. Welcome back, everybody, to Bobby Talks, ... You know why those dots are there. I'm sitting here with Mike Neal, the professor out of Adrian College and the owner of Corked Media Films. This is take 2 of this, by the way. We just nailed this reopening here. But
If I butcher this next one.
yeah, I'll trip all over my tongue here. We were just talking about how he is currently the... you started the Adrian Film Festival, right?
Yeah, alongside with Scott Westfall.
Yeah, so we're going to get into this in a little bit later in the show, but just let you know that that's how I met him. I was a judge on the animation series from 3 years ago. Is it the third year or fourth year?
It's the fourth year.
Man, time flies. And what I was going to say this before I found out we weren't recording, but now that we are. You watched all those films, right?
Sure, yeah.
So from year 1, I don't know if you remember this film or not, but there was an amazing piece done from a guy, I believe he was an animation film. I
know where you're going already.
Irony.
Yep.
Do you remember this film?
Yep.
The first time I saw that film, I wanted to see it again. It's so much so that I reached out to this guy. I can't pronounce his name.
Yeah, I can't either. It's RJ registered.
Yeah. And I did. I ended up purchasing it from him because I wanted to show my students. There is talking about truth. It goes along with what we're talking about. He's really trying to pull back and show the ugly face of social media and the addiction to it.
Right.
But he uses some really graphic images.
I forgot all about that. Relevant.
Do you remember that?
It would be to my classes as well.
It really would. And it hits in like 10 minutes.
When he made that too.
Really?
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
The kid's a freak talent. Yeah.
And I just remember, so like if you guys haven't seen this, I don't know where you can see it at.
I think he hosts his stuff on YouTube actually.
Does he?
Should be able to find it there. Yeah.
It's IRONY, so like irony, but it's irony or whatever.
Yeah, kind of like iPhone, like lowercase I and then Roni.
Yes, check it out. It's definitely something. I just remember thinking that, and there's a lot of components of that short film as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I should say this, but he has a film again this year.
Really?
Painting by Numbers, and it kind of is a similar theme. Kind of looking back at artwork and its representations of truth.
Sure.
But he has just dominated the short category since he won the first 3 years.
Yeah.
He's got an entry this year that I'll frankly be surprised if it doesn't take the award again
It's
this year.
Really? Okay.
So he's still in his young 20s, but this kid, I mean, I wish I could say his name because I would say, hey, watch out for this kid because he's going somewhere. He was, I think, Sri Lankan born, living in Australia now.
Yeah, he's in Australia. Yeah.
Just kind of finishing up his kind of education side of his filmmaking career, but he's going to be doing big things.
Yeah, Yeah, he is. We'll just stop there because we only got a half hour here, so I want to make sure.
Topic with RJ, but he's cool.
No, he's cool and definitely worth checking out. But what he talks about a little bit is that the addiction, and especially in that first one, right? He talks about the addiction to these things, to social media, to our cell phones, to validation through likes and what we put our value into. And you've already discussed it a little bit about technology and how it's never going to go away, right? And it's going to be on us how we can approach it. Can we get there? Are we too far down the hole?
I think I described it. I think we're married to technology, but it's our relationship, that marriage, how that's going to look is going to be kind of our potential saving grace. I talked a little bit about use and gratification theory as to why we keep doing this because we like it. It makes us feel better. It's just like a drug addict,
even though,
right?
Even though it's not healthy, we
want a little bit more of the hit. We want a little bit more. That's why when we know we should be sleeping, we're still swiping a lot of the time. Yeah. So to go along with that, another theory that we cover in the communications department is called Cultivation Analysis. And it speaks to the idea that eventually, and it can definitely happen already, that these influences in our phone, whether they're a podcaster or a different media network or whatever it may be, can potentially outweigh the building block value of your parents or your religion or some of those other kind of things that grow you into who you are. So you're eventually going to take more credit is going to be given to what's in your pocket than what your parents are telling you, and we don't want to be raised by these two.
Right. Yeah. What I'm an optimist too, but I gotta say, I the more I do this, the more I try to educate myself on just multitude of topics. I I don't know that, I talked about how I think we fix it with the generational, teaching the youth and how they approach these things. The problem is that as I said that, I almost have to divorce myself from that statement now, because the technology increases and improves so fast, right? And I think about Elon Musk, and I think about Sam Harris, and I think about these guys and some of the things that they've said, and where technology is going to go. Right now, it's an extension of us, but they're going to be bringing it on to us. And by the time we've corrected one fix and educated a generation on one fix, well, we're already way behind the 8 ball on another. And I don't know that we are there right now. The technology is inevitable. It's going to be coming, and we're not ready for it, but yet we're not going to say no to it.
Right.
So...
And you just hit, that's all exactly right.
Right.
It's coming. We're not ready for it, but it's going to happen anyways.
Will it be the downfall of human? Or let me ask this question. Does the technology...
space we're going into.
I know, but you know what I mean? Like that's where it's fascinating to me, is that, a lot of people talk about, downfall of a country. Yeah, the disinformation, the news, and the way we look at America right now, and the way we're at war with each other. And that's where I wanted to go with the Capitol riots, but we'll get there. Right now in this lane, it doesn't have a... technology right now and the addictions, you call it the users and gratifications theory.
Uses and gratifications.
That doesn't know borders. There's people in all parts of the world that have their own version of what we're going through. As a human society, what does it look like after we accept the inevitable chip that's going to go on our brain, when we no longer think because it thinks for us? Is it going to be like the cyborg humans versus the non-cyborg humans who refuse, and they're like, no, I'm staying off the grid. I don't want to implant something in me, even though they will be superior when it comes to knowledge, and kind of like the movie Limitless. Mm-hmm. Is that where we're going? Is that where it's going to look like? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's such a tough. I love these questions. I love these kind of deep, theoretical, not necessarily right or wrong questions, but yeah.
Do you see? I mean, is that something that's possible? Am I speaking outside of a box here? Like people at home,
we know Neuralink is already being produced.
It's already happening.
Yeah, it's happening whether we like it or not.
Right.
And there are some applications that they're working towards on Neuralink that sound phenomenal. Like the ability to take somebody who's paralyzed and give them the ability to walk again, right?
Which is phenomenal.
From a chip in the brain. That's incredible. But do we need our Facebook feed, 2 inches from our eyes. Or from our retina, basically? Probably not something that we need, but
will be a byproduct.
Exactly. It's going to be there as well, because we're going to want, everyone wants the new hip technology, right? At the same time, and some influencers will drive it forward, and something that we would have said we'll never do today, 5 years from now, we'll probably be waiting in line for.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the question of if this is the downfall of humanity or not is a really big one. I said it seems like we're in a bit of a pivotal moment right now in kind of the human race. We know we've been... kind of modern humans for a couple 100,000 years now, but just in the last 100 years, the advancement of humans has been astronomical.
Yes.
Like in comparison to the first, 199,990 years, like it's just amazing how quickly we're moving. We talk about Moore's Law, how fast this stuff is moving forward.
And it's only going to get faster.
So one thing I love always thinking about is the possibility of alien existence. And a lot of people think that one of the biggest kind of reasons we might not be, is to speak to the Fermi complex, there might not be aliens, is because of a great filter event that every intelligent civilization goes through.
Sure.
And I guess where I'm going with this is I'm worried this is where we're coming to right now.
Right.
And I don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe there aren't endless generations of humans to come. But if you just look at science and kind of from a bird's eye view, it sure seems as if there's some potential end coming to this.
Well, I guess when I said the end of humanity, I guess I didn't necessarily mean like we're not going to exist no more. But what I did...
I mean that bleak, to get that bleak.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is that I meant like the literal, like what makes us human is beating heart.
Right.
Death is inevitable.
Yeah.
We have emotions, right? Which you try to master, you try not to, whatever. That's what makes us human, the ability to think and comprehend and all these things on our own. The moment it does it for us.
Yeah, without digital interference, right? This is just
that's what makes us
skin,
human.
bone, and blood, right? Yeah.
The moment we mix those worlds, I'm asking, even though we look like human in human form, Are we actually human? Or are we cyborg now because it's on and implanted on our brain?
Yeah.
Because you can say, like, we talked about kind of like weaponizing these things. Elon Musk forever was trying to get government to, and not just ours, but others, to regulate how far these companies can go, because he says the technology's here. It's going to be a matter of how people use them. And then when he found out that nobody was listening to him, well, I'm going to get in front of it then. He decided to do it. And that's the very problem that we're talking about. So now that technology does exist, and it might have every intention of being for good and for, pure good, right? Somebody will get their hands on the technology and will find a way to make it profitable.
Right, rather have it's one of those let it be in your hands as opposed to somebody else's.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
And that stuff is shown to be inevitable. Once it's here, it's here. And it's going to be a matter of how do we now navigate that
nuclear
world.
weapons, right? One of the earliest examples, something like this. You're obviously Elon Musk fan, big Elon Musk fan as well. So you're probably familiar with his relationship with simulation theory.
Yes.
And that.
Yeah.
So I hate going down that rabbit hole because it can be such a kind of mind bender, and it's,
We just kind of did on my last episode a little bit.
So I don't need to go down it too much, but the idea of your question of will we still be human if we kind of marry ourselves to these technologies kind of beyond our current.
Right.
We're separated right now. I'd say we're engaged right now.
Yep.
So once we're married, it's on the finger, right? It's
right.
attached to us. A lot would argue that we were technology to begin with, right? They say, so there's the new idea, and it's a proven theory now that if you look close enough at our DNA, we're actually digital if you get down to the Planck length, which is the smallest unit of measurement possible. They believe that we actually have resolution, this world that we're in right now. And so to give you an idea of how small the Planck length is, it's something I listened to recently that I found fascinating, so I'd love to share with you, your listeners, is there are more Planck lengths across 1 grain of sand than there are grains of sand lined up next to each other all the way around the world. So just kind of gives you an idea how small this resolution is, but the fact that we know it's there is very scary.
Yeah.
To kind of say that there is kind of
to be able to
look down that far and to see kind of the building blocks of what we are might in fact be some way digital. So that kind of comes back to simulation theory, to the idea that this is all a digital experience that we're going into right now. So that kind of reemergence with technologies is inevitable if that's the case. So,
man,
it's mind-boggling stuff for sure. But
you're right. There's
scary.
a whole
that's a different podcast,
series that could be
Yeah.
down on that. Neil deGrasse Tyson has just changed his mind again on simulations. He's come back to this idea that he doesn't believe we are in one now because he has this higher thinking question that he cannot answer, and because of it, he believes that we're not. Let's not go down there.
Sure.
Right.
Let's go back to the kind of marriage of the technology.
Sure.
So another part of this or another forward-thinking technology that a lot of people are looking to right now. First, it was cryogenics. Everyone wants to live forever, right? Now there's the idea of once we master quantum computers that we'll be able to upload our consciousness to a computer, and that is again like. Kind of like, I guess, start to sweat just thinking about it. Like
we discussed this on the last episode too. It's the idea of
listen to that whole episode.
Well,
stuff.
Yeah, because something new we're doing this year on Bobby Talks is we're doing the first hour on YouTube, and then whatever extra we have just for my Spotify listeners. So that's where that came in.
Yeah.
Yes, that is definitely. And I asked the very question. I'll ask it to you. Just because it exists, should it exist? Should we go forward with it? Or is it inevitable because it exists? You're always going to have your bad actors, and therefore we should.
Well, what if that's how history is potentially written in the future, is by actually bringing people from the past to tell us about it? It could be a potential direction. I mean, we started with textbooks, moved to movies. Maybe we'll eventually have actual ambassadors of certain ages. Maybe that's the type of control that goes in. Maybe certain people are afforded the opportunity to take their consciousness into a new time.
And actually see something play out.
Potentially. Yeah, I'm wary to guess where it goes, but the fact that it's at least it's theoretical, possible, and like you said, once we get beyond theoretical and can prove its actual application, then it's going to happen to some degree. So it just becomes, how does it fit within our society? And the idea of our already overpopulated planet, everyone having eternal life, we know that is not going to be a sustainable
right.
future.
Which is why Elon Musk talking about going to Mars is an interesting thing.
I'm not getting a ticket.
I'll live mine here.
Yeah, this is a good planet for me.
I don't even like flying that much as it is.
Yeah, 6-month flight, pass, 500
And
million
then you
miles.
see those designs for, or at least his last episode on Joe Rogan, he talked about halfway there, they're going to have a hotel in space. That way
I didn't hear that
you
part
didn't
of
hear
the
this part?
conversation,
For about
no.
3 months, they're going to have this orbiting hotel. I mean, it's just...
Got it. So it's almost like literally just going to be part of our solar system.
Yep.
Wow.
And that you can just get out, walk, stretch, do your thing, get back in, and go.
Crazy.
So it's funny because we have this big picture conversation, right? And sometimes when I sit here and I have this big picture thinking, and then I take it and I look at the current present, it's like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, get on board with this understanding that there's a bigger picture because we're fighting about all this stuff right now. Let's talk about influence.
Okay.
And truth, and just sticking with truth because that's the topic of the show today. Does truth exist?
I knew this question was coming to some degree, and I thought about it ahead of time, and I didn't come to an answer ahead of time. Yeah, I think no. I think you can argue against any absolute truth. I think there is perspective for any response. Of course, you can get very remedial with 1 + 1 + 2, but then you go further down. Well, what's math? What's the one? Of course, you can get.
And that's where we are.
Right, and unfortunately, I think truth is important because I think living amongst truth gives us guidance.
Right.
However, I think, as you just said, we're in an age right now where, especially with the amount of information we have available to us, it's very rare, if not impossible, for it to have just a very clear truth.
That is hard for somebody like me who looks for the truth in pretty much everything and gets frustrated by the spin jobs that are done, right? I know they exist, and I try to move my emotion away from it because I know it exists, right? So I try to be more in the executive mind where I can just live in that world and overcome it because I can only control me, yada, yada. But if truth doesn't exist and it's only the perception, what do we do when we hear things like, and I use Donald Trump as the example. And I'm not trying to talk politics, but I am talking about this country and the fibers of this country. And when we talk about, if one man believes something and he has so much influence and he doesn't have a filter or a regulation process, something that's telling him not to say the things he says because he doesn't, whether or not he means harm or if he doesn't have the foresight for harm, or maybe he does and he just kind of wants to see what happens. You can argue all of those things, but regardless, he said it. And he believes the election was rigged. The moment he said that, the same day that the election was still taking place, that became a movement.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
And look what it's caused.
Mm-hmm. I think the seeds were planted for that movement
Long
without
before
a doubt,
that.
as
Long
you know.
before.
Yeah, but...
So the truth.
I guess, what would be the question there?
The question is that if this is who we are then, and you're saying that truth is only in the eye of the, it's all a matter of perception, right?
Yeah.
If I can get enough people, and that's where I'm scared about right now, is that right now, I read in an article that 42% of the American population believe that the election, one way or another, was rigged. Mm-hmm. That is a scary number because that is a number that impacts all elections going forward, at least for the immediate future, until we get past this point in history. The truth is that, at least from what I've seen, is that there's always levels of fraudulence.
Yeah.
Right? But with social media, with technology, with big media conglomerates such as Fox News and InfoWars and things of that nature. InfoWars isn't around no more. That's Alex Jones things, but... you know what I mean? Some of the right-leaning, they buy into this narrative, and then they start selling it. And then you have the counterpoint, who's trying to paint the picture that they're evil and that we're the truth, right? Somebody's got to be right, don't they?
No.
Yeah,
I mean, put bluntly, my personal belief, my truth, is that No, they're both right and they're both wrong.
Okay.
We'll just use this specific example, even if it's a little bit hot. We'll let a Canadian come in and tell you about your American politics. Why not? So in the case of the election fraud,
Sure.
I think, and beyond that case, language plays a very huge role in what is truth and how it mobilizes people. Because I think we can agree, everyone should agree that amongst a national election, there were going to be some issues with the election, right? We're talking hundreds of millions of votes, so there's going to be maybe more than a couple.
Bad actors,
right?
yep.
Some bad actors, some issues that happen. So potentially that makes it truth to everyone on the right side because they can point to a couple of specific issues that makes the election technically flawed.
So since it wasn't pure.
Exactly. So it wasn't perfect.
Sure.
So it's flawed.
Okay.
Right? But then the counter to that would be that the issues did not counter the actual results.
Didn't change the result.
Didn't change the results of the election. So they're both telling the truth from their perspective, and that's where the kind of issue of language comes in, is to let's kind of put some kind of clear guidelines as to what is and isn't a fair election, right? How much fraud can there be?
Right. In order for it to be considered a national, I guess that's a really good way of putting it, because it's sometimes I get caught in the black and white, looking for the black and white. And that's just a gray because of the language that we use, but the problem is that everything is being dissected and weaponized against the other side now. I don't know that we can get to a common ground. I don't know who that is.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the most unfortunate parts. There's so many unfortunate parts. One of the very unfortunate parts of this age of information we're living in is how combative it's become.
Right.
So we talk about how everyone has really kind of entrenched themselves in their team, their side.
Yeah.
It's very identity politics, obviously a huge part of what
regardless
we do
of
here.
how bad the quarterback is as a human being and what
That's
he does.
my team.
That's my team.
Yeah, got to stick with my squad regardless. And that I'd love to see that gap be bridged a little bit.
Me too.
I think it's definitely on the topic of truth. Some of the issues of this is in how media in the United States is funded.
Okay.
So we know that Sinclair Media and Grand Media are a couple of the largest regional broadcast station owners in the country. You might have seen Sinclair was vilified quite a bit around the 2016-17 election for pushing narratives to all of the regional stations, and it's actually fascinating because you could see the same story being read by 1,000 different stations, verbatim, word for word. They call them must-reads.
Really?
And this became a huge issue to point to. Look what Sinclair's doing. Clearly, they're working for the right. But then Graham Media did the exact same thing for the left. So is it truth if this trusted local reporter is being forced to read something, but you as the audience has no idea they're being forced to read that?
Yeah.
And the issue of that is in the construction of these stations. And I don't mean Canada has its own host of problems, to say the least. But one of the things that I think has been so positive for the country is the CBC, which is the Central Broadcasting Station for Canada, which is government subsidized.
Yep.
And because of that, they don't work for the government, but they're not worried about the bottom dollar making whoever's pockets deeper at the top. So that kind of helps bring the divide a little bit closer, where the conservatives and liberals have the same platform.
Isn't that a problem that in your own country you have to have an outside like CBC or the BBC, the British Broadcasting channel, that they are the places that you go to try to find the middle ground and the truth of what's taking place in your own country?
Yeah, you're right. We should look inward.
You think? I mean,
as opposed to looking. We don't want to get politics, but I don't ever want to look to the government for the solution necessarily. Right. But in that case, in the construction, it worked with CBC, BBC. So it'd be nice if these kind of capitalist-style media stations would take a similar approach, knowing that they're successful in those areas. But I think some of the kind of earlier days of the competition of these sites and force them to entrench themselves in certain spots.
Let's stay on the same topic, but kind of navigate it to a different different kind of segment of it. You're a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. I love filmmaking. I went to school for TV, film, and radio.
Right, yeah.
I had an internship out in California. Did the whole thing. I consider myself to, I've written scripts, and one day would like to make my own, feature-length film someday. it's getting over that hurdle, right? Just getting the mindset to do it.
Hey, let's talk about that off air sometime. Yeah.
As a teacher, when you are kind of talking to your students about art, right? Art is supposed to make you feel something, right? At least that's the way I look at it. Do you talk to them about truth at all and how they should, especially, I don't know if you have any documentary filmmakers, but like how they approach truth? Just curious as to how you would teach it to the next generation.
I think more than anything, we teach them to be aware of their intent. Often that's built into the style of the production.
Okay.
Documentary filmmaking in particular, there are 6 kind of known modes of documentary filmmaking.
Okay.
If you're going to make a participatory film, meaning the director is involved in participating and in offering their Michael Moore, a very famous,
Yes, very engaged into the process. Yeah.
his thought process is involved in the film. If that's the case, be clear about that, be upfront about that, let it be known that these are your opinions, as
Sure.
opposed to if you're going to do something a little more reflexive, which is I'm taking a look at a particular topic and reflecting upon it, you should make sure that you're offering a true perspective of that event. Or something I tried to do in something like Bud Fowler, Page Fence Giants, is to understand
Sure.
not just his own successes, but a lot of the kind of cultural issues that were going on around that time.
That would be fair, right? It gives it context, right?
Absolutely. And it's impossible to do it perfectly. And that, again, comes down to my kind of position as far as truth. We all have these biases that are inherent to us. So
That's true.
I'm
Yep.
going to edit a story differently than you're going to edit the exact same story. You're
Right.
going to want to include a couple different things that I might not want to include, even though both of us truly believe we're giving kind of both
A
perspectives.
fair version of it.
Absolutely. So I guess it comes back down to I'm not sure there is
Truth.
an absolute truth.
So then it comes back to the idea that truth is only, it's
In the eye of the beholder.
eye of the beholder. It's all about perception, and reality doesn't really exist because your reality can change.
Yeah.
That's
And
interesting.
Isn't it frustrating, though, when you get somebody who wants to share with you their truth and they're extremely passionate about it, but you see it differently?
Yes.
And you know that they're in this idea and they're not going to remove from it, and it becomes this kind of, do I even want to mentally engage with this with them?
That is, man, we just lost power here, which is fine. We still got this one going, and we still
Okay.
got the audio. That's fine.
Sure.
That's just a side camera.
Running you late here.
What a great point, man. I literally just had that conversation with a lady the other day. We were talking, and I asked her, I said, what do you believe about this 42%? And she says, I think it's bullcrap. I don't accept it. And she went down and had her reasons. And I sat there in the moment thinking to myself, I'm not sure I can even continue to have this conversation with her.
Right.
And but then she said, well, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice and everybody else by shutting the conversation off. And I'm not still sure where I thought with that, but I thought it was an interesting point for her to make. But I'm not sure where I fall on it. So.
Yeah, I absolutely. It's difficult to kind of figure out what the right answer in those situations are. I want to challenge my friends to maybe explore some different information
Sure.
when they have kind of their ideas set in stone. But when you have your ideas set in stone, you're really not looking for other information, right? As we talked about, our individualized experiences on the web right now, make sure of it.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. Mike, I really appreciated you, man. I don't know if you want to go another 10 minutes here just for my Spotify listeners.
It's all you, man. Whatever you want to do.
Let's go
Have a
another
blast.
10. If you're still with us, YouTube, let's go down this road of the Adrian Film Festival. I kind of
Sure.
want to talk about it, get your
Great.
plug in, and then we can get on our way.
Absolutely.